Hi, I'm Sam, head brewer at Lawrence Beer Company. Today on Behind the Beer, we have a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Amy Pope, owner and founder of Repetition Coffee, and Sam, thanks for having me today.
Today we're going to talk about our neighborhood collaboration. It's Cahoots, a coffee stout. To kind of set the stage, it was in 2017. We were under construction at the brewery. We didn't have walls or a roof. It was winter, and we didn't have Wi-Fi, so I'd spend a lot of time at Bon Bon and Decade sending a $7 email, which was an email with a cup of coffee. And I had a really amazing cup of coffee at Bon Bon, and I asked the barista where the coffee was from, and they said, oh, that's Repetition, they're right down the street. I knew I'd wanted to make a coffee stout, so finding a roaster was on my list of things to do, and here they were right around the corner from us. So I started scheming, how do I meet them, convince them that they want to work with us, and that's sort of how the partnership started.
Unbeknownst to Sam and Lawrence Beer Company, we also had been peeking from our garage door and watching the progress on the build out of Lawrence Beer Company. And on grand opening day at 6 a.m., we were here at Repetition to brew some extra coffees, bring some air pots, and welcome them to the neighborhood.
Yeah, so it was great. Turns out the folks at Repetition love beer and Lawrence Beer Company loves coffee, so the relationship wasn't nearly as difficult as I thought it would be to form. So where some brewers will take roasted beans from a roaster and steep them in the beer, that process works great, but it's less deterministic. The brewer is hoping to get certain flavors, but once the beer has been steeped in once the coffee has been steeped in the beer just tastes however it's going to taste, and they don't have a lot of control over it. With the process that Amy and I use, it's a completely conscious process. We taste through all the coffees, we determine exactly what beans we want to use, what roast profile we want to use, how strong we want to brew the coffee, and exactly how much we want to add to the beer. So when we leave the tasting table, we know exactly how the finished product is going to taste.
So when we start with the exploratory phase here from Repetition's perspective, I know that the coffee that we brew needs to be strong enough to cut through a stout beer. And so we brew our coffee through espresso. We also brew the coffee cold brew, and we do some FETCO batches, but not just a normal hot brewed coffee. This is brewing 1:6 ratio, and at home you would be using 1:16 to 1:18. The espresso would pull more like a 1:2 ratio. So when Sam comes over, he usually has some idea of what coffee flavors he wants to cut through. So as the roaster, I select coffees, we brew them different ways, we set them down on the table, and then Sam and I begin tasting, and it's a process of elimination. So the coffee on its own is going to be really bitter, but once we start adding 9 to 12% into the beer, we start to find that sweet spot. We first select the coffee, and the coffee each year changes. So coffee, just like hops, is an agricultural product. It's a fruit. And so every single year, the crops that we are offered, they change. There's some consistency with region. Sam and I, for Cahoots, have used in the past also the same coffees that are in this year's blend. This year we chose a Peru from Cajamarca, and we also chose Uganda from Masaka. The reason that we landed on these two coffees is the Peru coffee brings through a lot of nutty and chocolate tones. It also has some nuances that bring in some berries and fruit and a little bit of stone fruit. This alone is nice, but we needed something, the bitterness of coffee, to actually cut through the beer. And so this is where we bring in 25% of a Uganda. This coffee's got a lot of black pepper spice naturally, and also has like a very baker's chocolate, almost bitter chocolate flavor that helps to cut through the beer. In the past, we've used 100% Uganda, and we've also used 100% Peru. This is the first Cahoots year that we have a blended coffee offering.
This stout is brewed with coffee in mind, so it's also counterintuitive the way I write the recipe. It is assertively roasty, and it's quite heavily hopped. It is a true American stout. We think of coffee as being dark roasted. I put those flavors in the beer through using a lot of roasted barley, so that when we go to Repetition to start tasting coffees, we're looking not for roasted flavors, which you would get from dark roasted coffee. We're looking for the really nuanced, interesting flavors that are intrinsic to the coffee beans. So Amy can bring a lot of really interesting coffees to the table. The beer recipe takes care of the roast and dark chocolate flavors, and we can really be adventurous with the types of coffee we use to bring in all those other exciting flavors.
So when the work starts over here at Repetition, it's usually a very laborious day. We have already roasted the beans a week in advance, so there's a little bit of time for them to degas. We roast them slightly darker than we normally would so that they extract more easily. And it's a pretty messy day over here. We have about 53 pounds of coffee, and we're gonna do about 63 brews on our FETCO. We're then putting that into a keg. We siphon that into a keg, and Sam rolls over his dolly to pick up the keg and takes it back across the street where it will then be married with the beer.
And then I add the coffee into the beer. It's about 9% of the total volume. So there's, in each pint glass, there's just under 1.5 ounces of really super strength coffee. If you drank a cup of that coffee on its own, your vision would start to vibrate. But when you put it into the beer, you're having a little bit of coffee mixed with the alcohol. So it's kind of a uppers and downers cancellation effect. So while there is some caffeine in the beer, if you drink a couple pints, the alcohol is going to take over and you're not going to notice the coffee. Even though it's there in such a strong ratio and it's so prominent in the flavor profile. So through this neighborhood collaboration, we've managed to create beer for breakfast. Cheers.
Cheers, Sam.